All right, so the rare first thing in the morning meditation recording, 10-year commemoration of the writing that ultimately was Being and Learning. This is number 60. I should have had this ready to go. I think it's 60. There we go. 66. And it is the last, what would be the last bit of writing of chapter 4, Plato's Allegory of the Cave and Being and Learning. At the time, I was just writing away, and I came to more or less the end of the extended, slow and steady discussion of the allegory, concluding really with emphasizing this point of the cave itself, as I talked about yesterday in the meditation commentary, the cave itself being totally reimagined so that it was understood as a space of the conservation and using Heidegger, the sparing of freedom. So, and therefore the preparation of learning, because the sort of contribution I think I was making in this bit of writing towards the ongoing thinking of Plato's allegory was turned on the question, is there a sense in which we're prepared for learning? And so yesterday the sort of important move happened with Heidegger and a quotation from him, who Heidegger made this sort of link between dwelling and freedom. And so, he goes through and he says, we do not dwell because we have built, but we build because we are dwellers. And then he says, what is the essence of dwelling? And he goes back to the Gothic word woonian, and then he makes a transition, said, like the word bowen means to remain, to stay in place. So the Gothic woonian more distinctly says how we are remaining in place. So, and then he says that woonian means to be at peace, and then he says that the word for peace also means freedom. So basically he makes this link between dwelling, remaining, peace, and freedom. And that's actually going to be really important for the work, right? So that sort of set of terms in that way, dwelling, remaining, peace, freedom, right? So it's very important. So on now to the final meditation of chapter 4, or which became chapter 4, from 419, 2004. Above we quoted Heidegger, who said, existence rooted in truth as freedom is exposed to disclosedness of beings as such. Still uncomprehended, indeed, not even in need of an essential grounding, the existence of historical man begins at the moment when the first thinker takes a questioning stand with regard to the unconcealment of being by asking, what are beings? In this question, unconcealment is experienced for the first time. We quoted Heidegger within the context of our exploration of the sage, who we called the first thinker, the teacher who reposes the learner and draws her on to the path of philosophical wandering, when he offers the gift of teachability in the form of the question, who are you? We said in posing this question, the sage draws the apprentice into the open region of questioning, where existence reposing occurs. If existence is rooted in truth as freedom, then freedom designates the truth which is disclosed in and through philosophical wandering. The essence of learning is freedom. The full force of the relation between truth, education, and freedom is not felt until the completion of the captive's releasement, when he ascends out of the cave and is fully adjusted or attuned to the horizon of the open space and seeks to begin his journey. However, this releasement was initiated in the part 2 of the story with the unchaining of the first turning of the prisoner. This initial turning identifies what Heidegger calls the questioning stand. In being compelled to stand up and turned around, The captive is being held out before that transitional gap, that space which opens up the possibility of something entirely other to emerge. Confronted with this space, the captive is now captivated by confusion. But in stepping out, the released one is for the first time taking a step beyond the location where he has been hidden. With this originary relocation, the former captive begins the movement beyond, to the openness of the open region, where the truth of appearance will appear alongside the truth of concealment. This emergence of the twofold play is called disclosedness, the reception of which we have called attunement. In being turned around and drawn beyond the security of his location, the releasement of the prisoner is the gradual yet confounding transition to existence, freedom as the questioning stand, the standing beyond, outside the secure habitation, the familiar. Quote, existence rooted in truth as freedom is exposed to the disclosedness of being as such. Unquote. From Heidegger. The perplexity brought about by the showing of the edifice as artifice is the original encounter with disclosedness, with the truth of appearance. This is the first moment of freedom. The questioning stand is the first step in the process of learning as put underway by liberation. In being released from schooling and drawn into learning, the captive is being drawn into the questioning stand by one who reposes him. This perplexity is the questioning stand, which signals the reception of the first evocative saying. The first thinker is the one who arrives from above and beyond, from the locality of imposition, the unilateralist dominion. The captive is repositioned or relocated by the teacher, who now stands alongside, side by side, and now acts as an insistent guide. The teacher, as a first thinker, as one who reposes, who speaks with the evocative voice of the sage, is not mistaken for the educator, the unilateralist who imposes upon the captive. As the one who releases, the teacher seeks to draw the captive into the company of those who have wandered into the open horizon. This wandering gets underway and continues on its way when the questioning stand has been taken. The questioning stand is both a way and a where. It is both a modality and a location of learning. As a way, the questioning stand signals the reception of the other as ultra, the reception of the alterity, the gift of teachability. This gift is offered by the teacher as a sparing. To spare is to keep in reserve, to preserve or conserve. In the third part of the story, we encounter the sparing as the conservation of freedom, the birth of the apprentice as the painful process of liberation. Quote, and suppose someone were to drag him away forcibly up the steep and rugged ascent and not let him go until he had hauled him out into the sunlight. Would he not suffer pain and vexation at such treatment, and when he had come into the light, find his eyes so full of its radiance, so he could not see a single one of the things he was now told were real? It's from the Republic. These are the birth pangs of liberation, which are experienced in the arduous ascent up the long passageway. Here the teacher as guide must insist upon the transition, must act like Socrates, and thereby practice the art of midwifery, myutics. If we follow Arendt, this important transitional moment identifies why the original encounter with the evocative saying of the teacher produces a disorientation that requires assistance if it is going to be negotiated successfully. To negotiate it successfully is to emerge anew, transformed, and be released. And this is why Socrates likened his practice to the art of midwifery, the art of curing ignorance or illusions of grandeur through the perplexing talk that disoriented, relocated, and released into learning. The illusions are products or the results of the one-sidedness of opinions, the self-certainty of those who, it turns out, really have no perspective because they have never stepped beyond their habitual habitat or taken up an alternative location. As Arendt reminds us, what Plato later called dialexai, Socrates himself called myeutic, the art of midwifery. He wanted to help others give birth to what they themselves thought anyhow, to find the truth of their doxa. The Socratic art is thus the practice of relocation via confusion, reorientation, via disorientation. But this is an art that seeks to preserve life, bring forth truth, an art of sparing, a dialogic encounter that moves along as a give and take through reciprocation, despite it initially appearing as imposed or insisted upon. Thus the releasement to learning is depicted as in some ways as a lingering of imposition, as the last remnants of the asymmetrical relation which nevertheless help bring about the birth of freedom, the releasement to learning. And that's the end of the meditation from 4/19/2004, read this day, 4/19/2014, and it is the last of chapter 4 on the allegory of the cave. And it's a really interesting, good way, I would argue, if I do say so myself, to end that chapter, because it comes all the way back to the sage, right, which is the chapter 3, the saying of the sage, and sort of connects that. This chapter sort of ends by reconnecting, and then it of course connects with Socrates, which was chapter 2 of Being and Learning, the calling of Socrates. So so two sort of circles were made with Socrates, and then the third chapter, the Way of Lao Tzu, with the conclusion there. And so in particular, I have to say that I like the last sentence where it says that so Socrates, as practicing maieudics, or being a midwife of thinking, had to exert some kind of pressure, or some kind of he had to insist upon the people that he was dialoguing with to give birth, quote unquote, as Arendt puts it, to their thinking. So they're pregnant. The thinking is their capacity to think. They have it within them. It just needs to come out. It needs to be disclosed, and that's actually the link between being and being's twofold play of hiding and showing, or concealment and appearance, and the human condition of thinking, which is that it's never fully disclosed. It comes out in part because one of the modalities of thinking is listening. And so there's this receptive modality, which is like thinking in its form of concealment, or its modality of concealment is really just another way of emphasizing perception or listening. And so for Socrates, though, to get that, to have thinking expressed and to have it coming out, he needed to push them to the people he was speaking with to speak, and the way he did that was through his evocative questioning. And so the way that I end this meditation, the way that the chapter ends, is by saying that there is this kind of lingering, if it's the case that the first thinker is the teacher, the one who motivates and prompts thinking, right, and is the one who emancipates towards freedom, right, so shows the learner. So what I'm suggesting is I'm following Heidegger, there's the first thinker, the one who has the originator experience, and then indicates that, right? So the sage has this role of being the teacher, because the sage points towards the disclosure of human freedom, the offering, right, that I've been calling the offering of freedom by being. So in the sense that the sage is sort of the first in the order to come along, and to, so there is still this role of the teacher, the one who points towards human freedom. I'm trying to get my finger, there it is on camera, so it points towards human freedom. In this sense, then they have this in their pointing, there it is, in their pointing, and they're being a sign, if you will, if they're indicating, there's a moment of power there. They're insisting upon, here, look this way, you gotta look this way, you have to perceive in this direction, right? And so the how that happens is what the whole experiment, the whole project is about. But that it needs to happen is clear, and that's a move of power. And so in that sense, because this first thinker, this sage, this teacher, is, I'm arguing, arriving from this place of, where the place now we've talked about, reimagined as a place of schooling. So a member of the staff, if you will, of the school staff, has to then emerge and come down from that space, and then their role is changed. So it's the figure of the teacher now evolving from school teacher to the one who is able to guide learning. And so in that case, though, that they have the remnants, right? They have the residue, if you will, of being this teacher, school teacher, the one who has this power. So that's why I say that the releasement to learning is depicted as in some ways a lingering of imposition, the last remnants of the asymmetrical relationship, which nevertheless, of course it is, right? So that there's still, and this is something that I've learned from Arendt, in her way of understanding the authority of the teacher, is that they still have that there is still this figure. There has to be a figure, someone who is representing thinking insofar as they have the moral authority to stand, quote unquote, in between the newcomer, the student, and the world, the old, in between the old and the new. It's very significant that we maintain that role and that position of authority, as Arendt calls it. Deep breath. Okay, so that's it for chapter 4. That's it for the meditation from 419, 2004, read this day, 419, in the morning, a beautiful spring morning here in Portland, as we get ready to get underway and take a drive down to visit family in New Jersey.